Hello friends and neighbors. In my last review of Annie Warbucks the Musical, many of you made note of the first manifestation of the curse of the Scottish reviewer. For some reason when I uploaded the video, the audio became out of sync. I still don't know what happened. It was fine before I uploaded it, and then I uploaded it and it got screwed up. I apologize for that. I was in a hurry and was not able to check it after I uploaded it, but the lesson is clear. Always, always, always check your videos after you upload them, and before you upload them, and weeks after you upload them. And I know that that's really annoying, so I might be re-uploading that review at some point, but I'm not going to do it right now because I don't want to lose the comments that I've already gotten. So just do your best to ignore it, and I apologize for the inconvenience. Now, with that out of the way, let's talk about mythology. But first, the intro. So what am I doing? Thanks for joining me.
What are you filming for?
Now when you first hear the word mythology, you probably think of stories of Zeus and Poseidon and Hercules and all these Greek and Roman and possibly Egyptian and Norse gods, depending on what kind of mythology you're into. You know, classical mythology. The stuff that Rick Riordan writes about. But there's actually a broader definition of mythology. Mythology is basically any information about the universe in which a story exists. So obviously the ancient stories of the Greeks and Romans exist in classical mythology that we often study. The stories of the gods and how they came to be and who they are and what their personalities are like and what kind of powers they have and how they interacted with the mortals and all that sort of thing. The Harry Potter series also exists in a mythology where we learn about the history of Hogwarts and the history of the Ministry of Magic and the wizarding world and all the different people and places and events and all that sort of thing. Now sometimes the mythology can be pretty sparse and you don't learn a lot about the world, but sometimes it can be incredibly detailed, like with J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings. Now there is of course a collective mythology for a lot of these stories. For instance, a lot of fantasy stories borrow from classical mythology, which is why a lot of mythical beasts are similar. But that's not always the case, and mythologies are often very different from each other. For example, the elves in the Harry Potter mythology are very different from the elves in the Lord of the Rings mythology. And mythologies aren't just confined to fantasy stories either. Every story, every fictional story has a mythology. Because if you think about it, a story, a work of fiction, is a myth. For example, John Green's book Paper Towns takes place within a universe where a girl exists named Margot Roth Spiegelman. This girl doesn't exist in the real world, neither does Quentin or Ben or Radar or Omnictionary, but they exist within the universe, within the mythology of Paper Towns. Probably one of the more fascinating mythologies that I've read is from a book that I recently finished and will soon be reviewing, Mouse by Art Spiegelman. In this mythology, the people have the heads of animals, and these are symbolic heads, and they never really acknowledge that they have the heads of animals, and they behave like humans throughout the story, but in the second part of the novel especially, they will sometimes break the fourth wall and become aware of the fact that they have these heads, and moreover, that these heads are merely symbolic, kind of blurring the lines of fantasy and reality. And we become so fascinated with mythologies of stories that oftentimes authors and publishers will publish compendiums that just have all the information that you could possibly want on these different stories. Harry Potter has a bunch, The Lord of the Rings has a bunch, and of course we study classical mythology. That's existed for centuries, millennia even. But where this really gets interesting is when you make the transition from a book to a movie. And I think one of the key differences between books and movies, and one of the main problems that people have when books are made into movies, is differences in the mythologies. Because much as we might not want to admit it, the mythology of a book and the mythology of a movie, even if they're telling technically the same story, is going to be different. The movie is going to exist in a different universe than the book is going to exist, and therefore the background stories and often the histories of the characters are going to be different. Let's take Dan Brown's universe. No, not that Dan Brown's universe. I'm talking Dan Brown, the author. Dan Brown wrote 2 stories featuring Robert Langdon as the protagonist. I know he actually wrote 3, but we're not talking about Lost Symbol right now. When he wrote the books, the events of Angels and Demons came before the events of the Da Vinci Code. However, when they made the movies, they made the Da Vinci Code first, and so for the movies, the events of the Da Vinci Code took place before the events of Angels and Demons. So even though they were both telling the same stories, they were in a different order, and so the mythology was different. Our knowledge of mythology also leads to our awareness of continuity errors oftentimes. Because we're so obsessed with knowing everything about the universe of a particular story, if there's even one error within the telling of that story, we notice and we're thrown by it. Because we would like to believe that the universes in which these stories exist are real and they have actual, real, believable facts, but the fact is, they're not, and oftentimes the authors are going to make mistakes. So I really do think that mythology is one of the major keys to how we tell stories and how we interpret stories, but as always, I am eager to hear what you think, so leave me your thoughts on this subject in the comments, or as a video response. I think this subject is endlessly fascinating, and so I look forward to reading your comments. Thank you in advance for your thoughtful responses to this video, and until next time, this is Matt Guyon reminding you to check your videos before and after, and weeks after you upload them. Is when I lost the thread of what I was saying.